Councillor Rod Fyffe, OAM, Deputy Mayor, Greater Bendigo City Council. So, Rod, your 2 minutes.
Starting now.
Starting now.
Thank you very much. Look, for a council law, what we are charged to do is to make sure that we make our decisions in the best interests of the whole community. So our big problem and our big challenge is to listen to the silent majority. And if you think that's easy, think again, because it is almost by osmosis or divination or something like that that you need to take on board what people in the community are thinking and talking about and indeed requiring. The other challenge that we have is to get information out to the community because, as many people know, if they're not interested, they're not going to take it on board. And so we need to make sure that we've got a host of ready facts and figures and so on like that at their command when and if they want that information. And it needs to be accurate. The other thing that we need to remember too is that when we're looking at long-term implications, there will be quite a sizable proportion of the community that's not interested. Their response is, well, we elected you to do that, and if we don't like what you've done, we'll throw you out at the next election. So that's some of the expectations that I have to meet and some of the challenges that I have over the next probably 10 to 15 years. Yes, I will be there.
Thank you very much, Rod. Of course you will be. We will all be here. So I'd like to introduce you to speaker number 2, Domenic Isola, who is the CEO of Hume City Council. Domenic began working for Hume City Council in 1999 and during his time has held positions such as Finance Manager and Director of City Governance and Information. Thank you, Domenic.
Thank you. I won't repeat what Councillor Fyffe just said because they're all very relevant. I'll try and put a bit of perspective about what we do. I should start by saying I'm an accountant, so we do have fun, I hope, and in our teams, and it is exciting. So what we've tried to do over the last couple of years is to go out to the community. We've done lots of pop-up sessions, and in the first case, we've been fairly definitive. We've said the average residential rate in Hume is $1,483 for those that come into the group. So if this is one of the groups we'd run, we'd actually give you $1,483 each in paper money. We'd have all our services listed in boxes, and we'd actually say to you, go and allocate the $1,483 into those boxes. Not so much for, getting it right or what is the answer, but more for where does the community think the money should go to. Really interesting outcomes that came out of that. We are spending far more money, or our rates money, in certain areas like parks and waste than what the community actually expect. Not that I don't think that's important, but they were surprised by the amount of money that we spend on delivering parks and open space. Surprised at the amount of money that we spent on waste. Didn't think they were unimportant services, just didn't actually allocate a similar amount of money than what we do. What we're intending to do this year, because that is a very finite measure, it is saying that is the amount distributed as you think it should be. What we're going to do this year is much more a participatory budgeting model. It actually says, there's the amount of the rates, there's the services again. Do you think we should spend more in service X, so aid services, and at what percentage? And also define underneath that, if you're saying we should spend an extra 10% in aid services, that will deliver an extra 3,000 hours to our clients. If you think we should spend 5% less, that will mean the 3,000 hours don't get spent, and that will mean that we've got a waiting list. And so what we're trying to do is, the education process is a relevant one. Communities will understand about where the monies go, but also about the trade-offs. And the trade-offs can be a couple of ways. Trade off 5% more in aid services versus spending 5% more in parks. Or also, we don't want to pay as much rates. We're happy to give up 5% in aid services. We're happy to give up 5% in parks. Therefore, we pay less. Or conversely, happy to pay a bit extra in rates because we want more services around parks or aid services. So fairly simple measures the first year. This year we'll try and get a bit more sophisticated in looking at trade-offs between what we do. And in terms of, because some of those questions got me a bit, longer term, financially, we have general principles that say we must achieve certain things. They're non-negotiable. So when we put a budget together, there are certain things that are non-negotiable, and those are about sustainability. Okay. They're not tradable.
Thanks very much, Domenic. So quickly pass on to Ross Goeman, who is the Manager of Corporate Performance at Monash City Council. Ross has worked across several city councils and is a member of the Essential Services Commission's Engagement Technical Working Group. So we're very pleased to have him on the stage today. Thank you, Ross.
All right, thank you. I think certainly from an internal perspective, the first challenge that really comes up is as soon as you step away from that formal submission process in sort of May or June, everything becomes more complex. The amount of time you need to plan for and that lead time really steps you up. So, in terms of Monash, for us to be consulting for the 2018-19 budget, just at a basic level, we're doing that consultation now. And I think when you start looking at it in terms of a higher rate cap application, the need then is to be doing years in advance rather than trying to just sort of jump into it at a last moment. Building on that, I think it's also, it's not about a point in time. Running a consultation, trying to cover everything in that one point in time, that one moment of engagement, isn't going to work. The need to build the organisation's capacity and resources, the ability to analyse all those past consultations, all the work that goes into all of the strategies and plans, to be bringing that together, to be able to summarise that, to make that sort of information accessible to the community, rigorous, and particularly when you're looking at such a host of people in a community, whether they're visitors, residents, ratepayers, you're covering a whole range of things, both the users of services as well as those who might be paying through property rates. I think just as some interesting example for Monash at the moment, we're one of the few councils that doesn't have a waste charge. And just to go through the process of introducing a waste charge. So once we go out to our 70-odd thousand households and commercial and industrial properties and engage them, then send out a survey to 20,000 residents that are tenants in properties, who are the users of services who otherwise wouldn't be engaged. The scale of a project like that just around a quite small thing is very large.
Okay, thanks very much, Ross. Laurie Ellis is the Director of Governance and Corporate Performance at Mitchell Shire Council. He commenced with Mitchell Shire Council in February 2016. He has substantial experience and expertise in directing and managing corporate services within the local government, not-for-profit and small business sectors. So, Laurie, a few words from you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just give you a little bit of an insight into Mitchell. In 2015, Mitchell had a rate rise of 6.9. That was on the back of a number of very high rate increases, and we were the third highest average rate across the state. There was a protest at the council on the steps of the council later in 2015, and the council resolved to go for a rate exemption. When we did that, we had a short window of time to get out to the community and ask them what they thought. We had been consulting progressively, and previous consultation had told us that there was some likelihood that some of the community members would engage or would be happy for us to actually have an excess above the rate cap. When the rate cap came in, it was a 2% difference to where we wanted to be. We went out with this brochure here, which sort of become infamous. We just asked a question at 4.5%, 2.5%. If you go for the rate cap, these are the services that we're going to cut. So I think we went out a bit too clinical, and the community overwhelmingly said no with a capital N-O. So the council has since basically lost its appetite at all to go out to the community and ask for a rate cap. Basically, I put it to them this week as part of our strategy for next year's budget. They said no. So we're not even going to consult on that, but we did consult heavily on our council plan and on our health and wellbeing plan. What we've been doing now is consolidating our consultations as much as we can. We've had road management plans and all those things. We're trying to pull them all in together so that we're not going out time and time again. And there is a sense of there's been too much consultation. So that's where we're at.
Okay, thanks very much, Laurie. And finally, we're very pleased to have Dr. Robyn Sheen here from Darebin, who is a community member and has also been part of a citizens' jury as a community member. She has worked across government roles in Canberra as the head of the Commonwealth Office of Regulation Review and in Melbourne as an Assistant Commissioner to the Productivity Commission. So I'm very pleased to welcome Robyn. So thanks for your perspective, Robyn.
I was a member of the Darebin citizen jury, and the point of that jury was that we were given $2 million to spend over 2 years, and it had to be on capital works. The selection of the jury was interesting, given it was the product of randomly sent out letters across the community that ended up with 40 people being selected across the 3 wards that were broadly representative of a number of demographics, but by the time people self-selected, it was not representative, and it was in just about any way at all. But I haven't got time to go into that. So we had $2 million to spend, and that presented a number of challenges. The people were fairly committed, but there was a significant lack of understanding about what that would involve. So I'm just going to go briefly through the key things that we had to get everyone across on that jury before we could get at the selection of the things that we wanted to do. And so the first thing was we could only have capital works, so we couldn't have any services at all. So the first thing that everybody had to understand was the difference between current and recurrent and capital funding. So you think everybody would know that, but actually they don't. So that was the first thing everybody had to understand. The second thing everybody needed to understand, and you think they would because everybody does this with their household budgets, but they don't think it applies to government, including councils, that when you have a capital work, that you actually need sufficient funding in the council budget in order to support it if recurrent funding is needed in the following years. So that placed a lot of limitations on what we could actually choose. So where we started off with a rather big wish list of what everybody would like to do, once we got everybody on top of what the limitations were, the wish list started to contract somewhat. We also needed to get everybody to understand the extent to which council is limited by its limited discretionary funding. So it's got a fixed budget so everybody, including the people in the jury, thought that, well, what we had was the council with a huge budget, and every year that budget was up for grabs. So no, that was the next thing they had to understand. It's a fixed budget to a large extent with that much discretionary funding. So when you were looking at anything that needed supporting funding in following years, we had to make sure that the council could give us a nod that there would be sufficient funds to do that in the following years. We had to get people on top of the cost of capital or opportunity cost. If you want to do this, you can't do that. So even when we narrowed that wish list down, we then had to get through if we do this and it costs $500,000, that's going to knock all these things off. But what would be the public benefit if we did that one big thing? Would that produce a bigger public benefit than all those smaller things? So that was another significant challenge, and where we could, we tried to introduce some kind of evidence base. So that was not always successful. So I guess, and the other thing was going back to the household budgets, that councils are also dependent on revenue. So that's where the whole rates issue comes in, that just like at home, you can't spend more money than you bring in. I think that the jury at the end did understand that, although it was finally whittled down to only 28 people. We came up with, I think, some really good proposals, and the council had said to us at the very beginning it was all or nothing. So we could come up with a set of proposals, but if they knocked one off on the head, they were all knocked on the head. So I think we did pretty well because we got them all up. But it was a very big learning curve, and I think, a really beneficial one.
Thanks very much, Robyn. So just we've got some questions here that the in Essential Services Commission's Engagement Technical Working Group have devised, but I'm also wondering if there are questions from the floor as well. Some of the questions from the working group. So, Rod, and of course this is open to anyone else as well, what do councillors need from council staff in terms of engagement?
Accurate information and methods of engagement. In other words, should we be looking at a citizens' jury as opposed to a pop-up meeting? Should we be looking at a ward tour, or should we be looking at just a meeting with residents? So from a councillor's point of view, we need that information to make that sensible decision. And we do understand that it will be different in different areas. Now, like even in the city of Greater Bendigo, we've got 3,000 square kilometres. What they think of or how they look at community engagement in Elmore is which is to the north east of here, is very different to Lockwood, which is to the southwest of here. So it's somebody mentioned before, there are no horses for courses. It's all going to be a mix and match, and I think that's what we need from our officers who probably have worked in that area for quite some time.
Okay, would anyone else like to comment on that?
I just
yes, please.
Have a comment around horses for courses. 6 of our councillors are new from the last election, and our starting point, I believe, is educating the councillors in the financial management of the municipality before we go out to the community. And we've been holding a series of meetings. We ran a survey of the councillors after their first budget, and they basically fed back that they didn't feel engaged in it. They didn't feel like they understood it. So our first step before we go to the community is educating the councillors in some of the things that we're talking about with the community engagement. So that's the starting point, I think, is making sure they are right across the budget, understand the implications, and then they can get that message out to the community.
And in that same sort of vein, it would be useful to know, how do the councillors take the outcomes of the engagement into account when making decisions? What's your experience of that?
Well, I think there's still this sense of discretionary funds that we were talking about, that the councillors are still coming to grips with the fact that there are limited resources, and if they want to go in a particular direction, generally speaking, that means that there's something else that has to be sacrificed. So I think we're still trying to get to a point where there's an understanding that we can't have everything. So
yeah. And would you agree with that, Rod?
Definitely. We had 7 out of 9 new councillors, and they're still grappling with what can be achieved in a budget. And just simple things like a surplus. We had 3 councillors think that the surplus meant we could cut rates to 0, maybe even have a few minus ones. But so we do need that understanding, and this is where the officers' contribution is most important. So. And yes, they do know now that surplus does not mean that we can cut rates.
I think that we'll take a couple of questions from the floor. Ross, how do we engage? What's your view of how we engage the silent majority?
Well, I mean, the silent majority, that what does that mean? There are those people, as long as most things are ticking along, their general expectations, they don't have to worry about it, then they're quite happy not to participate. And I think continuing on from the previous question, really you're looking at a more longer term engagement plan. It's, how do you build up that literacy and understanding? How do you make sure there are a range of different opportunities for people to participate, rather than trying to find a point in time at which you can jump in and capture everyone? There's a whole range of reasons why people may or may not participate. Some of it's about making sure there's enough of a variety of techniques that get to those that are probably more vulnerable or more at risk of the decisions impacting them than other groups.
A more general observation, not just from the citizens' jury, I think that communities, when they're consulted, they need to believe that they're being listened to. They need to see some tangible outcomes. So even though they may want councils to do particular things and that may not eventuate, they need to know that they were listened to, and they need to know what the reasons were why council made a different decision. Putting it bluntly, too many consultations for government, local government, state government, Commonwealth government, is merely an exercise in ticking boxes. It has to be done. It's one of the lines on the strategic paper. You have to do a community consultation. And once the community feels that they're just a box being ticked and you're going to go away and forget everything that they said, they're not going to come back and engage again. That's the reality of it.
I think you've got lots of head nodding going on in the panel there. So Robyn, just while you've got the microphone, from your experience on the citizens' jury, do you think that it can apply to a whole budget or only to narrower topics?
Well, as I said, we only did capital work. So I would imagine if you then wanted to extend it to what services are delivered, you're actually getting into road augmentation, potholes, a whole lot of things that people actually have no interest in, because when they think about services, they actually think about the services that they're picking up personally from the council, like childcare or whatever. They're not thinking about potholes. So I think I think it can be done, but I think it would be extremely difficult to get any citizen jury against a line to consult on a line by line budget.
So Rod's had some experience as well.
Yes, we did the whole budget last year, and Ian from New Direction will be able to help you with some of the technical side of it, but we went out and said, what should we spend our money on? And we had a very, very favourable response. It was really great, really good. 26 meetings I think it took, but well worth it.
And you got enough money for potholes?
We don't have potholes in Bendigo.
The parking fees pay for them, do they? Moving right along. So, Laurie, you mentioned consolidating consultations. How do you do that?
Well, some of it's to do with the fact that a lot of our organisations are siloed, and we tend to go out and do things in our area rather than looking across the organisation and say, what are the sorts of things we need to be talking to our community about? And I think that's how we sort of brought that together. So we had people in community services working with people in our communication area, and even people on the road. We had the road maintenance levels, which is not all that exciting for the community as to how often we're going to fill those potholes. But the idea is trying to break down those silos and get the collaboration across the organisation and identify what are the issues we really need to be going out and talking to the community about, and then putting that together. And there's no reason why the budget can't be attached to that. We found in the second year after that the community said no, when we went out and consulted on the budget, we hardly got anybody to come out because there was nothing controversial. So the previous year it was, but when there was no controversy, we didn't get anyone come out. But I think putting them together then brings the subject. And plus we put it right across. So our consultation was right across our different centres, different forums, so there was lots of opportunity for people to participate.
So, Domenic, I don't want you to relax. We've had a lot of conversation today about trust, and there's a question up on the board about cynicism, and Robyn mentioned, you've got to be real. How do you achieve that, as a CEO, in a value for money context?
I think it's a difficult one. I think everyone else has talked about the level of consultations that are done, how people can get tired of it. So you're asking the same questions over a range of things. So, we do lots and lots, and we get a report up to our council that says in the last 6 months we've done all these consultations. And I'm surprised where I sit as a CEO and look at how much consultations we've done. And I have a different view around the trust angle, which is about the community will come out and for important things, they'll let you know. And the trust comes from the ability to deliver. So we have an adage that we use at Hume about not just saying things, so not putting things in our council plan and in our capital works program and just saying it and funding it and resourcing it potentially, but actually doing it. So this real thing of accountability. We say we're going to do X, let's go and do X. And even when we do the consultations, we try and be pretty clear, because at the time of doing those consultations, there are relevant senior people that are involved that, in my view, as the CEO, I'd expect that my directors and my managers actually understand the service that they're in. They understand some of the issues, the demands, the things that the community is feeling, and they will put up recommendations, hopefully, that are representative of what we might be able to do. And those recommendations, hopefully, are able to be delivered. So the trust, to me, trust is a great word, but it's built to me on delivery, not just the saying. I see lots and lots of things that get said about what people will do. I actually like the do bit. Go and do things. That's how you build the trust.
Would anyone else like to comment on that trust and cynicism issue? Rod, have you? Yeah, well, Laurie?
I was just going to say, just very briefly, there was a lot of distrust in our municipality a couple of years ago, and one of the gauges of that was the local paper. We were in there every week, and there was letters to the editor. Now we rarely see anything negative against the council, and also letters to the editor are very few and far between. So there has been a movement in that trust, and our community satisfaction has gone up considerably over the last 12 months as a result of listening to the community and not going for a rate cap exemption.
So this is a question to you all. What is it that the community needs to know and do in order to be fully participating in the some of the decision making that you're asking them to participate in? Like what is it that they need to know? And how do you actually gather that information? That's a key as well.
I think, given the extent of some of the communities that we work in and the broad range of different views and interests and the like, I think if you can get the community to understand that, their rate dollars that are coming in are being used as well as what they could be on a range of different measures, that when they put in a submission to a budget or to consultation, that someone actually gets back to them to say, and sometimes you've got to say, I think the idea is fine, but we just won't be able to do that. I think sometimes the honesty has to be reflected in that discussion. And then it's, in life, everything that I know is a balance between the ability to raise revenue and source things and the ability to deliver those things. So, to try and get a better understanding for the community about those balances, you try and provide as much information as we can. I think our engagement team that we've got, and we've got one of our staff over there, Jennifer, do a great job in getting that information out to the community to say, well, this is what we can do. This is as much as we can do in this space because we've got these other priorities as well. And you try different things. So this year, for the first time, we've gone out to the community. Rather than getting budget submissions post us putting out a budget, we're getting submissions now about, tell us what you'd like us to do in a capital work sense around the things that will make an impact to you as a community, a sporting group, member of the public. And, I think we're up to 76 or so. We'll have a session with that group of people and say, this is what we can deliver. We'll be able to cost it, put it into the program and see what happens with it.
There's a comment from the floor which is interesting. It says, people are not literate to the processes and the terminology, which is what you were talking about, Robyn. Where appropriate, we need to use language and engagement activities that the community can feel comfortable with. Is that your experience, Rod?
Absolutely, yes. We do need to. That's why I said we need that information there for people when they want it, when they need it, and it must be in their language. So we might need to go through and redefine some things, and so that we and the community are on the same page. But we do need to make sure that we've got that common language for sure.
And Ross, is that part of your daily business?
Yeah. Look, and I think one of the critical things in this is really building the organisation's capacity and literacy. You know, you've got however many staff that work for the organisation. If they're not able to represent, you know, the breadth of what council does and explain that in a way that makes sense to people, and they're not aware and listening to what the community says, then, you know, that's probably one of the greatest opportunities you're missing. You know, before you sit down and sort of think of the citizens' jury or whatever, you know, what are the people out there working with kids in libraries, swimming pools, you know, whatever? What are they saying, the community saying of the issues? You know, and tapping into a lot more of that, getting that information shared, and you know, those opportunities for staff to really see some of the creative opportunities and the highest priorities. You know, certainly reflecting on my experience in local government, the first two councils I worked for happened to be places that were nominated as potential sites for toxic dumps in the 1990s, and both those councils, after very significant community rallying and so on, had incredibly good community engagement scores, incredibly good scores around you know, all that sort of stuff about decision making and trust. You know, so where you've got some sort of rallying point and so on, I think communities with significant issues are the ones that will really line up and prioritise.
And how do you, just from your personal experience, how do you, because many of the comments that are coming up are around that engagement isn't a new thing. You know, I know personally I've been at it for over 35 years, but it's this conversation here, and it's been very much reflected in the presentations, has been around what's value for money, what's resourcing, what are the expectations both from council and from the government and from the community. How do you balance all of that, those value for money issues? Sure. You've got the talking stick. It's okay.
All right. So 28 people isn't a huge number to extrapolate from, I guess. So this isn't science, but I'm taking this as an observation from our citizens' jury, that what we had was a group of people, as it turned out, once it was whittled down to the 28, were mainly professional, I'd say mid socioeconomic. But the interesting thing was that as the weeks progressed and we got through the process, what everybody concentrated on was where was the greatest need in the community, where was the greatest social and economic need, where was the greatest disadvantage. So nobody on that jury was actually looking at this process through self-interest. They were actually looking at where the community benefit was going to be. And I think that that's something that is possibly not necessarily well understood, that when you go out there to consult with the community, that when you ask them what they want personally, that's not necessarily the answer that they want. That's not necessarily what they want to talk about, because they, at least in that particular experience, everything was focused on where was the highest level of unmet need within those three groups.
And Domenic, how do you prioritise feedback?
Can I just respond to that though?
Of course.
Because my feel around some of that stuff is that we've got 11 councillors. I would hope that they come to the table with the same perspective of what is the greatest thing in the community. Because if you really define and want to look at the Local Government Act, that is their role. The Act actually says it's not about your ward, it's not about the 5,000 people that voted for you, it's about the whole community. So one of the things that we try and do very early with our council is to talk about the need of the community versus the patriarchal or whatever it is, I'll just look after my own area and patch. So I just think sometimes, there's the elected representatives who are there for the community. You've got the organisation, hopefully in our organisation we have directors and managers that look at the need of the community, not the need of their division and of their teams. And it might be an altruistic view, but that's what I expect of people that work for me. And we do put it on our councillors that that's what we expect. So, sorry, what was the question again?
No, it doesn't matter, because I want to explore that a bit more because there's been a number of comments up there about, is this push for engagement actually taking away, changing the concept of democracy? Is it somehow pointing to the councillors not having as strong community skills? Is this push for engagement, and we heard a lot about it this morning from the various government agencies, is this somehow changing the way democracy is working within local government?
Yeah. See, I'd have a view as well that, and I've said this to some ministers, that they run for council in our case, or run for a state spot. The community that's voted them in are expecting them to make decisions. They engage and have staff who they should expect will give them good information to make those decisions. But at the end of the day, we need to make decisions. Otherwise, things don't happen. So I'd question why 28 people as a jury is more important than 9 councillors at Darebin. So it's not something that I would propose, from where we are at Hume, because I'd say to our 11 councillors, what might 20 other people tell you that you don't know or don't understand? Or now, no doubt that the jury helps. I've got no doubt about that. But I'd go back to, the 11 people that are elected in a pure, democracy. They're elected by a range of the whole, community of, in our case, 200,000 people. Well, read the Act. The Act says you must do these things. It might be hard, but we will put forward ideas not by areas and wards, and we will put forward ideas and projects about the whole community. And it's tough.
So, Rod, did you want to add anything to that from your experience?
Not really. Certainly the jury we found validated the decisions and ideas and so on like that we as elected members were running with, and that was heartening. So yes, I think probably you need to touch base with an informed segment of your community, and that was one of the things about citizens jury, and I think you'd agree, Robyn, is that you had all of that information that we would have, and our jury came up with something that was very, very similar to what we were doing.
So I have to declare an interest here. I'm actually on the board of New Democracy, and one of the things that we say is that democracy, obviously with the voting and the representatives of people, has to continue. But what a citizens jury does, in our experience, over and over again, they don't come up with anything particularly new. They come up with logical, rational decisions, which, because they come from people who are seen as being like us, then they actually seem to be more trusted because they're not embedded into the system. So that's the function that the jury often makes. And I think that there were a couple of comments up on the board which talked about, councillors do have an eye on their re-election, and so that has an impact on the way and they may have the most altruistic approach to decision making, but nevertheless people are increasingly cynical about that. So, but I'm not a member of the panel, so I'll go back to if anyone would like to comment on that. I'll go back to the original question that I asked you, Domenic, and how in this kind of constrained resource area, how do you prioritise feedback? You talk to us about, people are feeding into your budgeting process. Not everyone can have everything. How do you prioritise that?
Yeah, I think if you go back to, say, a council plan and the directive that's put forward, there'd be things that will obviously happen from left field that might not be representative of the types of things that the council want to pursue over the next 4 years. So our first point of call is, well, where does that tie into the things that we've got in our plans to undertake, and for, obviously for good reasons. I think in the main, we will try and get towards at least trying to assess each of the things that comes through and providing some detail as to when it might happen or why it won't happen, and getting back to them. In terms of priority, it'll come down to resource, time, budget, importance, pragmatism in some point too. Can we actually do that? And is it feasible to do that project or have that done? And what might it mean? I think that one of the great benefits that was spoken about before was nice to have a project, but what does it mean to recurrent as well? So, yep, great project, and then you're going to add to recurrent. Has that been factored in? If it has been factored in, well, then we've got some other things to think about.
And how do you think, when you go through the consultation process and you've done the prioritising, do the council officers actually change their attitudes on things, or, how much learning is there within the council itself? And that's a question for all of you, except for maybe Robyn. I'm going to go with you, Laurie, and because nobody wants to speak up.
All right. I think...
Chatham House rules, okay? Chatham House rules.
Okay, we'll be quick. I think council officers obviously have a particular opinion in their area, and they have expertise in that area. So I think that to change that, to influence a change, there has to be a really good data to actually say, well, look, now the direction we're going here, this would be a better option. So I think there's got to be a strong argument to sway an officer to change their view.
Robyn, did you find that when you were interacting with the council officers or the councillors, did they change their views at all?
Well, I mean,
can we
just picking up one of the points you made before? In fact, we did
thank you. The microphone.
We did have one interaction where I explained to a couple of councillors the difference between recurrent and capital expenditure because they didn't know. One of the interesting things that came out of it, that I don't know if this applies across the board, but at Darebin Council, the mayor is paid, but the rest of them are unpaid, and they're like part-time workers. You're shaking your head.
They get an allowance.
They get an allowance,
yeah.
But they don't get a salary. Yeah. So in a sense, that made a difference because we started to see them as volunteers, just like us. But the fact was that some of the councillors were on board and really supported the process. Some of them came on board as the process went along, and others a couple of them just never got there. So it was a mixed response with councillors and dealing with them.
And Ross, what about in your experience?
With councillors or council officers?
Council officers, but also councillors. No, it's okay. It's good.
Yeah, look, I think it applies for both. The challenge in local government is that, we're an incredibly broad service provider, the 130 plus services or whatever we provide. But within that incredibly shallow, you've got a very small number of people in any one of those areas, largely grown up in a very professional context where this is the view of the world, and the world's constantly changing. Providing the opportunities for officers to experience the diversity of views and to appreciate the challenges and the outcomes the community might be looking for, that's the stuff that actually gets them to tap their sort of more underlying problem-solving skills and get out of, the ready-made answers of how we fix problems, using existing services. And I think ultimately in this conversation, it's about informed decision-making. Our role, wherever we come from, it's about how do we make sure the right diversity, qualitative information is out there for people to make decisions. The decisions might not be the right one today, they might be the right one tomorrow, but how do we make sure that information's available and accessible and transparent, because essentially that's what will bring the trust.
And is that a problem sometimes? Because it was one of the things that Rod said was a challenge, when he had his 2 minutes, is actually, eliciting the best information that you could possibly get from the council officers. How do we go about doing that and ensuring that it's, it's a more effective kind of information flow. Ross?
Oh, still with me.
Still got the talking stick.
Look, I mean, I still go back to my original sort of opening comments about staff capacity, and and until you spend a lot of time building up this intelligence and understanding of costs of services, overheads, a whole range of things. They're not simple trade-offs. Where you might think there's a simple trade-off. There's a whole lot of profound consequences to choosing between library opening hours and waste management and swimming pools and roads. And people have got to participate in understanding those trade-offs. And probably one of the things I think has come out of today is how do we better tap the whole sector and the experience, rather than sort of again being stuck in individual councils trying to solve these problems ourselves.
And just another question for you, Domenic. Where do your service plans fit into to determining what projects get in?
Yes, I was actually speaking to Andrew about this. So we started the service planning process about 5 years ago. Got interrupted by somebody out of Hume issue, but we started 5 years ago. And on the basis of, and this is obviously before rate capping, on the basis of just a general philosophy that we had about, we might be in services that we have provided for the last 10 years, or 20 years or 30 years, and things move and things change. And if we don't change, then all we do is just add. And by adding, then we ask for more. And, so it comes to probably a bit of background for me, a bit more of an economic rationalist that says, just because we've provided something for the last 10 years doesn't mean we have to keep on providing it, and questioning the why. So we started the service planning process some 5 years ago with the primary question of why are we in that space? Why do we provide that service, and why do we provide it in the way that we provide it? And I've got to say, as much as I can talk about it, I'm still unconvinced that we've got it exactly right. We've had some fair outcomes, and we've had some other outcomes where people have almost paid lip service to the service review, and nothing much has changed. And so we're actually redoing some of that and becoming very specific as to the questions that we want to ask beyond the why. And I think, whether we like rate capping or not, it's one of those things that's there, and it's one of those things that, unfortunately, it's been put on us by someone else. I'd like to think that we in local government would have enough capacity to say we will only rate as much as what we should, based on the things that we do are as efficient and as effective as what they should be. Effective, we actually get the things out to the community that should be provided, and efficient, we do things as efficiently as what we can. So we use a rule of don't waste resources, don't waste time, and never ever waste money, because it's too important from where the ratepayer gives it to us. So service planning, massive tick from me. Got to do it, because if you're in any enterprise anywhere in the world doing any type of things, you're always going to look at your business and your operations and how effective and how efficient they are. Because if you don't, you go out backwards. And I'd like to think that we will get better at our service reviews, because I say, as much as I can talk about doing our service reviews, I'm not sure we're there yet.
I'm just going to wrap up with one last question, unless someone has something burning from the floor. When we started the day, the chair of the Essential Services Commission made a distinction between consultation and engagement. And he said consultation was the process, engagement was the outcome. And I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. And I think, given what we've talked about in terms of resource constraints, both human and money, in terms of what people are expecting of us from a state government level, but also from a community level, from a councillor level, and from a council officer level, what would be the single most effective tool that you've used in terms of consultation, which gave you an engagement outcome that you could sit by and feel proud of? And the reason why I say that is because a number of people on the board have been saying, why are we talking about citizens' juries? There's so many other tools or consultation methodologies. And the reason, quite frankly, is because we've got 2 people on a panel of 5 that have experienced them. But there are lots and lots of other consultation tools which give an engagement outcome which is very effective. So I just would like to ask each of you what, in your experience, a really effective way of consulting with the community ended up with a really important engagement outcome.
Social media is one. We've had two particular ones, particular programs that we've gone to young people and older people via social media, and they have been very, very well received. One had over 4,000 responses. The other one was a mere 3,600.
Yeah, I think we found out how not to do it when we put out our survey and said, vote yes or no, and here's what you're going to lose. But I think in recent time that whole collaborative thing has worked for us, and getting out there and having multiple avenues of dealing with people, and also where there is a specific issue, trying to bring people that normally would be a bit disenfranchised back into that, like the young and the old, and maybe even people that are disabled that often don't get to a lot of places. So we're trying to work down those lines.
Ross?
Yeah, I think, it's incredibly contextual. It really depends what's the issue, the decision, who's it going to impact. And a survey at times could be the most cost-effective, quick, inclusive option. At other times it's got to be incredibly targeted, or it's got to be something that's multiple methods across a significant amount of time, because it is a complex issue, or, there's just such a diverse range of stakeholders that need to be involved and brought along on that journey. I'd say there's a whole palette of things out there. Getting locked in one method is really not going to help.
And I guess the corollary of that is having the skill and ability to be able to analyse what it is that you need from the engagement and then analyse the tools. Domenic?
I thought for us, we used some pop-ups and even just some whiteboards in most of our centres and different events and festivals. And just pick up on Ross's point, it was about aspirations for a long-term community plan. So we've got a community plan out to 2040, and it's actually driven by some of the thoughts that were put up on a whiteboard, different pop-ups, different information that we ran, different cafe things that we ran. And to me, that's pitching it at the level of what does the community want us to do in the longer term to create those opportunities and meet their aspirations. So not specifically about what we want to spend in X and Y, but more the global big picture. And we took that information, sat with our councillors and got someone to actually draw it. So not write it, but draw it. And we actually use that in our council plan and say that's the aspiration of the council, which actually is very representative of the aspirations of the community. So it's actually a drawing, not with words in it, but it's a drawing more than a series of dialogues.
So Robyn, as a community observer of all of this, we're going to leave you to have the last words.
And quite right.
And quite rightly so.
Okay, first of all, look, I think that the community is really looking for leadership from its leaders, whether it's at the local level or government level. So although, yes, consultation is a good thing, they want to be asked, they also, and this is picking up on something that you said, Domenic, they also want to be led. They actually want, we want you to come out and say, look, this is what we can do. What do you think about this? And what's it mean to you? But I think finally I just go back to the point I made earlier. It's really important when you go out and do a community consultation that the community doesn't feel at the end of it that you've just been ticking those boxes, because honestly that's so often what it all ends up feeling like. You've been ticking boxes. So there's no actual engagement at all, and there are no tangible outcomes that they can see because they're not really explained at the end of the day.
Thanks so much. And could you all put your hands together for Rod, Laurie, Domenic, Robyn and Ross? Fantastic contribution.